Imagine a student. Let's call him David.
Okay, David.
So David has just scored a flawless 100% on his final French grammar exam.
Oh, wow. Good for him.
Right. I mean, he knows every irregular verb conjugation. He knows those obscure subjunctive forms that, honestly, even some native speakers mess up.
Yeah, the ones that are just brutal to
Like,
memorize.
exactly. So he is, by all traditional academic metrics, a total star language learner.
Sure. On paper, he's perfect.
But then David takes a celebratory trip to Paris.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah. He steps off the train at Gare du Nord, walks into this bustling, noisy cafe, and he just tries to order a simple coffee and a croissant.
Just the basics.
Right. But the waiter asks him a rapid-fire question about whether he wants that to stay or to go, and he's using a really heavy Parisian accent, dropping half the syllable.
Oh, no.
And David just completely freezes.
Like a deer in headlights.
Exactly. His brain, which is totally full of perfect grammar charts, just short circuits. He points, stammers out a single word, grabs his coffee, and runs out feeling like a total failure.
It's a painful scenario.
Yeah.
But honestly,
Yeah.
it is incredibly common.
It really is, and it cuts right to the heart of what we are unpacking today.
Because we're looking at a fundamental, really seismic shift in how we understand human communication. And consequently, how we actually have to teach it.
Exactly. And we are tackling this specific topic for a very specific listener today.
Right.
If you are tuning in right now, you are a dedicated student. You're a future educator. And you are deep in the trenches preparing for your teaching opposition exams.
Which is incredibly stressful. The stakes are so high.
We know they are. So today is an intensive, deeply researched masterclass on topic 5.
Oral communication in the foreign language classroom.
That's the one. But look,
Yeah.
we are not going to just read your syllabus back to you.
No, that would be incredibly boring.
Right. You already know the headings. To truly impress an exam board, you need to show them the underlying architecture of these concepts.
You need to demonstrate a profound understanding of the psychological and, well, the sociological mechanisms at play when a human being tries to express a thought in a language that isn't their own.
Because the exam board is looking for educators who can actually synthesize theory into living, breathing classroom practice.
Exactly. They don't want a robotic recitation of authors.
No.
They want to see that you understand why the old methods failed students like David, and how modern methodologies actually rewire a learner's brain so they can survive in that noisy Parisian cafe.
So here is our roadmap for this deep dive.
We're going to trace the entire life cycle of oral communication.
Right. We'll start with the history, how we fundamentally redefined what it means to actually know a language.
Then we'll examine the biological and social anatomy of spoken language, which is, by the way, wildly different from written language.
Totally different. Then we will dive deep into the cognitive friction of how students actually acquire speaking and listening skills. We'll be looking at the heavyweights of linguistic theory there.
And finally, we'll take all that high-level theory and bring it down to the ground floor.
Right. How it physically transforms your lesson plans, your classroom management, and the way you assess your students without, completely destroying their confidence.
It's a fascinating journey. We're going from the abstract mind of the linguist to the very practical reality of a Tuesday morning classroom filled with 30 energetic teenagers.
Okay, let's unpack this. We need to start at the beginning.
The introduction of your essay needs to establish the historical baseline.
Right. Because for decades, the dominant philosophy in language teaching was structuralism.
It was highly influenced by linguists who basically treated language like mathematics.
Yeah, the idea was that knowing Spanish or English meant you possessed this internal dictionary and a set of architectural blueprints.
The grammar rules.
Exactly. The focus was entirely on competence in the abstract. Like, if you could diagram a sentence, you were considered proficient.
Language was viewed as a sterile, isolated system of codes.
And the teaching methods reflected that, right? Rote memorization, translation drills.
Endless worksheets.
So many worksheets. It's basically like memorizing every single part of a car engine.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Right. You can name the spark plugs, the pistons, the timing belt. You can draw a perfect diagram of how combustion works.
But having that mechanical knowledge doesn't mean you actually know how to drive the car.
Exactly. Especially not in heavy, unpredictable city traffic when it's pouring rain and someone suddenly cuts you off.
Right. And that analogy perfectly captures the frustration of language learners in the mid-20th century. They knew the mechanics, but they couldn't drive.
So when did this change? Because our listener needs to feature a major name in their exam essay here.
The turning point arrived in the early 1970s with a sociolinguist named Del Hymes.
Delheims. Okay, so what was his big realization?
He essentially looked at this structuralist mathematical approach to language and said, this is completely missing the point of why human beings actually talk to each other.
I love that. He just called out the whole system.
He really did. Hymes introduced a concept that completely disrupted the field. He called it communicative competence.
Communicative competence. Make sure you underline that in your notes.
He argued that grammatical knowledge is practically useless if a speaker lacks the knowledge of how to use that language appropriately within a specific social and cultural context.
I want to break down what that actually looks like in practice. Because grammatical perfection does not equal communicative success.
Give me an example.
Okay, so I could walk into a relaxed, informal coffee shop and announce to the barista, I require the immediate extraction of a caffeinated beverage from your espresso apparatus.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Right. The accent is grammatically flawless. The syntax is perfect.
The vocabulary is highly advanced.
But functionally, socially, it's a total disaster. People are going to look at me like I am an alien.
Yeah, you've completely failed to communicate effectively because you misread the social room.
Exactly. And that failure is what Hymes was shining a spotlight on, right?
Yes. Communicative competence means knowing who you are talking to, what their social status is relative to yours, the setting of the interaction.
And the cultural expectations of that specific moment.
Exactly. It's the ability to modulate your language. You speak differently to your boss than you do to your best friend, even if you're conveying the exact same basic information.
So Hymes flips the script. Language is no longer a math problem. It's a social tool.
Right.
How does this theoretical rebellion in the 70s actually translate to the modern policies our listener has to fire today?
Well, it became the absolute bedrock of modern educational policy. Specifically, the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages.
The CEFR?
Yes, the CEFR is the guiding document for all language teaching in Europe, and it is unapologetically built on Hymes' foundation.
So it basically shifted the goalposts for teachers.
Entirely. The objective is no longer to produce students who can flawlessly translate a literary text. The objective is to cultivate social agents.
Social agents, people who can actively use the language to perform tasks, exchange ideas, and just navigate a multilingual world.
Exactly. And the CEF breaks this down into what we might call the holy trinity of communicative activities. Spoken interaction, spoken production, and listening comprehension.
Notice that perfect grammatical accuracy isn't the headline there.
Right. The headline is interaction and comprehension.
This makes complete sense conceptually. But I have to ask, if Del Hymes proved this decades ago, and the CEFR legally mandates this communicative approach, why on earth do so many foreign language textbooks still open with 50 pages of isolated grammar charts?
It's a great question.
Why do we still see so much structuralism in modern classrooms?
What's fascinating here is the underlying tension between what we know is theoretically true about human communication and what is practically manageable in an institutional school system.
Because a grammar chart is safe.
It is so predictable. A teacher can hand out a multiple-choice test on the present continuous tense, and a machine can grade it in 2 seconds.
It's objectively right or wrong. It fits neatly into a grade book.
Exactly. It's measurable. But real, authentic communication, it is inherently chaotic.
It's highly subjective.
And deeply context-dependent. I mean, how do you efficiently grade whether a student successfully negotiated a misunderstanding with a hypothetical shopkeeper?
That's tough. It requires the teacher to embrace ambiguity.
Yes, it requires subjective rubrics. And to pass this opposition exam, our listener has to demonstrate that they are a teacher willing to champion that messy reality.
Over the sterile comfort of the easily gradable grammar chart.
Exactly.
That is a phenomenal transition into the theoretical framework section of the essay.
Right. We've established the why. Why communicative competence is the ultimate goal.
Now we need to put spoken language under the microscope and examine its anatomy, because spoken language is a completely different beast than written language.
It is, and we often make the mistake of teaching them the exact same way.
Which just causes immense frustration for the learners.
It does. When we teach writing, we are teaching a heavily planned, highly structured, and polished form of communication.
A writer has time to draft, right? Time to edit, to look up a synonym in the dictionary, to reconsider their phrasing.
But oral communication, by its very biological and physical nature, affords none of those luxuries.
So for the exam, there are 4 specific characteristics of spoken language that need to be detailed. Let's explore the mechanisms behind these.
Let's start with the most obvious, but perhaps most challenging one: spontaneity.
Spontaneity, meaning speech is produced in real time. There is absolutely no backspace button in a live conversation.
Right. And this places a massive cognitive load on the speaker. You are simultaneously trying to conceptualize the ideal you want to express, retrieve the correct vocabulary from your mental lexicon,
Apply the grammatical rules to structure the sentence.
and physically coordinate the muscles in your mouth to produce the correct phonemes, all in fractions of a second.
It's wild when you think about it, and because of that immense cognitive load, spontaneous speech is riddled with phenomena that a traditional English teacher would circle in red ink on an essay.
Oh, absolutely. We use fillers, the ums, ahs, likes, and
We hesitate. We pause awkwardly in the middle of a sentence just to search for a word,
we engage in self-repair.
which is when you start a sentence, realize you're going into a grammatical dead end, and just abruptly restart. Like, I went to the store, the bank, to get some cash.
And the crucial insight here for a language teacher is that these are not errors in the context of spoken language.
They aren't.
No, they are natural, vital cognitive processing tools. Fluent native speakers use them constantly.
That's so true.
If a student delivers a perfectly memorized, flawlessly grammatical monologue without a single pause or filler, they aren't actually communicating spontaneously.
They are just reciting a written text aloud.
Exactly.
That distinction is so important for the exam. Now, the second characteristic of spoken language is interaction.
Right. Unlike writing a book, which is a solitary act, speaking is almost always a collaborative endeavor.
Meaning, in a conversation is rarely a one-way street. It is co-constructed.
You are constantly reading the listener. Are they nodding? Are they looking confused? Are they trying to interrupt?
The speaker modifies their message in real time based on the feedback they are getting from the listener,
It is a dynamic, reciprocal dance.
which feeds directly into the third characteristic, context dependency.
Right. Written language has to be highly explicit because the writer and reader are separated by time and space.
The writer basically has to build the entire world with words.
But spoken language relies heavily on shared knowledge and immediate physical surroundings.
To see how powerful context is, let's do a quick example. Imagine you and I are sitting in a drafty room. The window is open.
Okay.
I look at the window, shiver visibly, look at you, and just say, wow, it's really freezing in here.
I know exactly what you mean. You want me to close the window.
Exactly. I didn't use the word close or the word window or ask a direct question at all.
You made a simple statement of fact about the temperature.
But because of the shared physical context and social norms, the actual communicative message was a request for action.
The context did all the heavy lifting there.
And because context does so much of the work, spoken language naturally exhibits the fourth characteristic.
Informality.
Informality. Spoken discourse tends to be way less formal. We use simpler sentence structures, slang, incomplete utterances.
Right. If someone asks, "Where are you going?"
Right.
you don't typically reply with the full, formal sentence, "I am going to the supermarket."
You just say, the store.
Exactly.
Okay. To anchor all of this messy, real-time interactive theory, the listener needs another heavyweight academic name for their essay.
Oh, definitely.
Who provides the overarching framework for why spoken language functions this way.
That would be Michael Halliday.
Okay, Halliday.
Yes. Halliday approaches this from a sociolinguistic perspective. His foundational argument is that language is a social semiotic system.
Let's unpack that, because social semiotic system is exactly the kind of dense academic phrase that looks great on an exam paper.
It does.
But we need to explain how it actually works.
Sure. So semiotics is the study of signs and symbols and how they create meaning.
And social obviously means it exists between people.
Right. So Halliday is rejecting the idea that language is just a biological instinct or an isolated cognitive function.
He's arguing that language is a vast network of meaning-making resources. Humans use it to construct reality, navigate relationships, and basically achieve goals within a society.
Exactly. It's the operating system of a culture.
The operating system of a culture. I love that.
And the most critical takeaway from Halliday for our listeners' essay is his view on acquisition.
Right. How do we actually learn this system?
Halliday argues that language develops through interaction.
This is a massive paradigm shift. It's not that we learn the language first in a quiet room and then go out into the world to interact.
No. It's that the interaction itself is the crucible where the language is forged.
Like, a toddler learns the word for milk, not by studying a flashcard, but by the desperate social need to ask their parent for a drink.
And experiencing the result of that interaction. We learn by doing.
Now, within this messy interactive system that Halliday describes, there are four specific technical components that a language learner actually has to master.
Right, to achieve oral communication. These are essentially the gears inside the engine.
The first gear is the phonological component.
And this isn't just about trying to fake a posh British accent
Oh.
or a perfect madrileño lisp.
No, this is fundamentally about intelligibility. It encompasses pronunciation of individual sounds, sure, but more importantly, word stress, rhythm, and sentence intonation.
It's the physical muscle memory of the mouth. And the psychological impact of phonology is huge.
How so?
Well, you can have a student with an incredible vocabulary, but if they put the stress on the wrong syllable, a native speaker might simply not understand them.
Think of the difference in English between the verb record and the noun record.
Exactly. It is the exact same sequence of letters. But the shift in phonological stress completely alters the meaning.
And when a student uses the wrong stress and the native speaker just stares blankly at them, the student panics. They think, I used the right word, why don't they understand me?
It's so frustrating for them.
The second component is the lexical and grammatical.
This is the traditional stuff. Possessing a wide enough vocabulary to express your specific thoughts.
And having the structural knowledge to put those words into an order that accurately conveys time, relationship, and quantity.
Then we have the discourse component.
Discourse. This is the macro level organization, right?
Yes. It's how you string multiple sentences together so that you don't just sound like a dictionary spitting out random words.
So discourse competence involves the use of discourse markers, words like however, first of all, on the other hand, or anyway.
Exactly. You use those to guide the listener through your logic and maintain cohesion.
And the fourth component is fascinating because it doesn't really involve words at all.
The paralinguistic features.
The nonverbal cues, gestures, facial expressions, body language, proximity, eye contact.
These elements are deeply cultural, and they frequently carry just as much, if not more, meaning than the verbal message itself.
For sure. If I cross my arms defensively, roll my eyes toward the ceiling, let out a long sigh, and say, yeah, that sounds like a fantastic idea.
The paralinguistic features entirely override the lexical meaning of the words.
The words say yes, but the body language screams absolutely not.
And a student needs to learn to read those cues in the target culture just as much as they need to learn the vocabulary.
Okay, if I can try to bring all this theoretical framework together.
Go for it.
If written language with its planning and its formal rules is like a classical symphony orchestra where every musician is strictly reading from perfect sheet music,
Right.
then spoken language is a live late-night jazz improvisation.
Oh, that is a brilliant metaphor for the essay.
It is spontaneous. It is highly collaborative, relying entirely on the context of the bassist and the drummer are doing in that exact millisecond.
It is full of informal riffs, hesitations, and sudden changes in direction.
Because in a classical symphony, a wrong note is undeniably a mistake. It ruins the intended perfection.
But in live jazz, a wrong note is just an opportunity to pivot into a new melody. The entire goal is just to keep the music playing.
And this leads to a really counterintuitive realization for a language teacher.
Which is?
If spoken language is jazz, that means we actually want our students to make mistakes.
Yes, we want them to hesitate, to pause, to use fillers, and to stumble.
Because that means they are actually engaging in authentic, spontaneous cognitive processing.
Exactly. If a student stands up and delivers a perfectly memorized, flawless monologue without taking a single breath, they aren't communicating.
They're just a tape recorder pressing play.
Teaching perfect textbook dialogues sets students up for catastrophic failure in the real world.
Real communication requires the flexibility to handle the unexpected. If you only train your students to read classical sheet music, they will freeze the moment they step off the train in Paris and are asked to join a jazz jam session. It's so true.
Okay, we have thoroughly mapped the theoretical framework, we know what spoken language is, and why it is so wildly different from written text.
Now we pivot to section 3 of the essay.
Key models. This is the engine of acquisition. How does a beginner's brain actually learn to play this jazz?
Do they just sit in the audience and listen, or do we force them onto the stage?
We have to split this into two interconnected processes. Speaking, which is the productive skill, and listening, the receptive skill.
Let's focus on the productive side first, because this is where your listener can showcase a profound grasp of linguistic theory.
Right. You need to present the great debate between two foundational researchers, Stephen Krashen and Meryl Swain.
Their theories represent the two competing philosophies of how language actually gets into the brain.
Let's start with Stephen Krashen. His work in the 1980s was revolutionary. What is his central mechanism for language acquisition?
Krashen is synonymous with the comprehensible input hypothesis. It's famous for the formula I plus 1. So, I plus 1. Krashen made a strict distinction between learning a language, which is the conscious, tedious study of grammar rules,
And acquiring a language, which is a subconscious process that mirrors how a child picks up their native tongue.
sort of like a sponge effect.
Exactly. Krashen argued that we acquire language in only one way, by understanding messages.
We must be exposed to linguistic input, right? Listening or reading, but it has to be just slightly above our current level of competence.
Right. The I represents the learner's current linguistic capability. The +1 represents the new, slightly challenging vocabulary or grammar embedded in the message.
So the mechanism here is that the student isn't actively trying to memorize the +1.
No, they are entirely focused on the meaning of the message. The context, the pictures, the teacher's gestures make the overall message comprehensible.
And the brain just subconsciously absorbs that new linguistic data.
That's the crux of it. Krashen believed that if you provide a student with massive amounts of comprehensible input in an environment where they feel safe and their anxiety is low, spoken language will naturally emerge on its own.
It cannot be forced. It's a very passive view of the learner's production.
It is.
You know, the video game industry actually uses the I plus 1 concept constantly for level design.
So really?
Yeah. If you are playing a game and the challenge is exactly matched to your current skill, you get bored very quickly. There is no friction.
Right. That makes sense.
But if the game suddenly drops a massive, impossible boss character on you that is way beyond your abilities, let's call that I plus 10.
You become incredibly frustrated, you put the controller down, and you quit.
Exactly. The perfect game keeps you in a state of flow by constantly presenting challenges that are just slightly harder than what you were used to.
That is the +1. It stretches your cognitive abilities, but it provides enough familiar context that it doesn't break you.
And for a long time, the communicative language teaching world treated Krashen's input hypothesis as absolute gospel.
Bathe the students in understandable language, and eventually they will speak fluently.
But as beautiful and elegant as that theory is, extensive research showed it was only half the story.
Which brings us to Meryl Swain and her output hypothesis. She looked at Krashen's model and saw a glaring hole.
Okay, what was the hole?
Well, Swain spent years observing learners in French immersion programs in Canada. These were students who had received thousands of hours of rich, comprehensible input.
They listened to French, they read French, they understood almost everything.
But when they opened their mouths to speak, their grammatical accuracy was shockingly poor. They lacked precision.
So Swain concluded that input alone is fundamentally insufficient.
Yes. Students must be forced to produce language. They must be pushed to create output.
Let's drill down into the psychology of this. Why is the painful struggle of speaking necessary if the student's brain is already successfully understanding the input?
Because the cognitive processes involved in listening and speaking are entirely different.
How so?
When you listen to someone speak, your brain is incredibly adept at being lazy. You can guess the meaning of a sentence by recognizing a few key vocabulary words and using the context.
Without paying any attention whatsoever to the syntax or the grammar.
You get the gist.
Right. I can hear someone say, yesterday, I go at store, and I know exactly what they mean, even though the grammar is totally broken.
Precisely. But when you are forced to produce a sentence, when you have to open your own mouth and physically assemble the words into a coherent thought from scratch.
That laziness is no longer an option.
Exactly. You suddenly realize what you don't know. Swain called this noticing the gap.
Noticing the gap between what I want to say in my head and what I am actually capable of saying out loud.
Yes. When a learner tries to speak, hits a linguistic roadblock, and realizes they lack the specific vocabulary or grammatical structure to express their thought, that moment of cognitive friction is incredibly powerful.
It crimes their brain.
Exactly. The next time they hear that specific structure in the input, they will actually notice it because they now have a desperate need for it.
So Swain argued that output pushes learners from merely processing language for meaning to processing language for syntax.
Right. So Krashen says, surround them with understandable language and their subconscious will do the work.
And Swain says, no, force them onto the stage, make them sweat, make them build the sentences themselves so they feel the exact shape of their linguistic limitations.
A modern teacher, obviously, needs to synthesize both.
Massive input to build the foundation and forced output to sharpen the precision.
That synthesis is the mark of an excellent exam essay. But we cannot talk about output without exploring the other half of the communication loop.
Listening. It is the receptive skill, but as we just discussed, it is anything but passive.
The outline highlights two specific cognitive processing models for listening: bottom up and top down.
This is where we look at how the brain actually decodes sound waves. Let's start with bottom-up processing.
Bottom-up processing is the micro-level linguistic grunt work. It is the linear decoding of the acoustic signal.
So the listener's ear catches individual phonemes, the smallest units of sound.
The brain groups those sounds into syllables, combines the syllables into words, identifies the grammatical markers on those words to figure out the syntax of this sentence.
And eventually arrives at the literal meaning.
It is like building a brick wall from the foundation up, one tiny piece at a time.
That sounds incredibly slow. If I had to consciously do that for every single sentence in a rapid, real-time conversation, my brain would overheat in about 30 seconds.
It is exhausting, and it is why beginners constantly feel overwhelmed. They are trying to bottom-up process everything.
Fluent listeners, however, rely heavily on the second mechanism, top-down processing.
Right.
How does top-down processing relieve that cognitive load?
Top-down processing is the macro-level work. It involves the predictive power of the brain.
So instead of waiting to decode every single sound, the listener actively uses their background knowledge.
Their understanding of the context, their expectations of the speaker, and their general knowledge of the world to predict and interpret the meaning of the message.
It's essentially the brain jumping to conclusions based on evidence. I joked earlier that top-down processing sounds like a fancy academic way of saying guessing based on vibes.
But there's a serious neurological truth to that.
There really is. Your brain is a prediction machine.
Think about the severe acoustic challenges of listening in the real world. We aren't listening to crisp, studio-recorded audio tracks of actors speaking slowly.
We are dealing with rapid speech, regional accents, people mumbling, massive amounts of background noise.
And the fact that native speakers constantly use reduced forms, blending words together so going to becomes gonna or want to becomes wanna.
Bottom-up processing completely fails in these noisy environments because the acoustic signal is degraded.
Let's go back to Gare du Nord in Paris.
Okay, perfect. It's chaotic, trains are screeching, hundreds of people are talking, an announcement comes over a terrible, echoing loudspeaker.
If you are relying on bottom-up processing, you are doomed. You cannot distinguish the individual French vowel sounds through the static.
But I have background knowledge. I know I am holding a ticket for a train to Lyon. I know my train leaves in 5 minutes.
You know, the announcement usually states the destination and the platform number.
My brain is primed, so when the loudspeaker crackles and I only catch the distorted acoustic fragments of .yon and .tre,
your top-down processing violently fills in the massive gaps.
I reconstruct the entire sentence. The train to Lyon is departing from platform 4. The context solved the audio puzzle.
That is a perfect illustration. And the pedagogical takeaway for the listener's exam is that teachers must actively train both processes.
You need bottom-up pronunciation drills so students can recognize sounds.
But you must also expose them to messy, authentic, noisy audio and teach them the top-down strategies to survive when they inevitably miss a word.
That concept of survival brings us directly into section 4 of the outline, oral interaction.
Because we've looked at speaking, and we've looked at listening, but they don't happen in isolation.
They crash into each other, and when they do, the CEFR makes a very deliberate, crucial distinction.
Yes, the CEFR separates spoken production from spoken interaction, and examiners want to see that you understand the difference.
Spoken production is a monologue. It is a student standing at the front of the classroom giving a 3-minute presentation about their favorite movie.
It's relatively safe. The student controls the pace, they can heavily script it, there are no interruptions.
It doesn't require them to read the room or adapt.
Spoken interaction, on the other hand, is a dialogue. It's a debate. It's a role play where two people have a conflicting goal.
Interaction requires all the spontaneous cognitive load we discussed earlier, plus the unpredictability of another human being.
It is where meaning is constructed collaboratively, and it is inevitably where language learners are going to stumble.
Their vocabulary will fail them, they will misunderstand their partner, they will hit a wall.
So when they hit that wall, how do they keep the conversation from dying? What is the toolkit we give them?
The toolkit consists of interaction strategies. The CEFR explicitly mandates that these must be taught.
The outline lists 4 crucial strategies to detail in the essay.
Number 1, asking for clarification. This seems basic, but it is deeply psychological.
It requires the student to admit they don't understand.
Right. A student needs the specific phrases to pause the conversation gracefully.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? What do you mean by exit? Could you speak a little more slowly?
Number 2, confirming understanding. This is proactive.
It's checking your top-down processing. So if I understand correctly, you're saying we need to turn left at the next light.
It ensures both speakers are still on the same page.
Number 3, reformulating. This is when you are the speaker and you see that panicked blank look on your listener's face.
You realize your bottom-up signal didn't work, so you have to say the same thing using entirely different vocabulary or a simpler grammatical structure.
The protagonist's motivation is ambiguous. I mean, we don't know why the hero did that.
And number 4, negotiating meaning. This is the ultimate collaborative effort.
It is the back-and-forth dance when a breakdown occurs, where both parties use all these strategies together until they successfully bridge the gap in understanding.
I think the best way to conceptualize interaction strategies is to view them as emergency life rafts.
I love that analogy.
Spending all your class time teaching a student complex vocabulary and advanced grammar is like teaching them how to sail a beautiful yacht in completely calm, crystal clear waters.
But interaction strategies, you don't just teach someone how to sail in perfect weather.
You have to teach them how to patch a leak when they are miles out to sea, the storm hits, and the boat starts taking on water.
That is exactly what happens in a real conversation. The vocabulary fails. The grammar breaks down. The boat is sinking.
If a student forgets the specific word for umbrella, they shouldn't just freeze in silence and let the conversation drown.
They need the interactional life raft, the circumlocution strategy, to say, I'm sorry, I forgot the word. What is the name of the object you hold over your head when it rains?
And here's a profound philosophical point you can make in your exam conclusion.
Teaching a student how to ask for help in the target language.
Teaching them how to confidently deploy that life raft is arguably far more vital for their real-world survival than teaching them the flawless execution of the past perfect continuous tense.
Interaction strategies are the ultimate engine of resilience. They keep the connection alive.
We are now crossing the halfway point of the essay. We are moving into section 5, implications for teaching.
This is the major pivot.
Up until this point, we have been living entirely inside the theoretical mind of the learner. Himes, Halliday, Croshan, Swain, top-down processing.
Now, we pull back. We look at the practical, physical actions of the teacher.
How do these grand linguistic theories actually reshape the lesson plan on your desk?
The examiner is looking for the methodological bridge. How do you translate theory into action?
The outline highlights the big 3 methodological frameworks that currently dominate best practices. The first is the overarching umbrella, communicative language teaching, or CLT.
CLT is the direct classroom application of Del Himes.
Precisely. In a CLT classroom, the driving philosophy is that language is a tool for communication, not merely an academic subject to be dissected.
It prioritizes meaningful, authentic interaction over the repetitive drilling of grammatical forms.
The focus of every lesson shifts from the form of the language to the message being conveyed.
If a student manages to successfully communicate their intended idea to a partner, even if their sentence contains a glaring verb tense error,
that interaction is celebrated as a communicative victory, not penalized as a grammatical failure.
it fundamentally changes the teacher's perspective on what constitutes success.
Methodology number 2 takes CLT and gives it a highly structured engine, task-based learning, or TBL.
I feel like this is where the theory gets incredibly practical and exciting for a teacher.
TBL is arguably the most powerful tool in the modern educator's arsenal.
In traditional teaching, you start with the language. You say, today we are going to learn the future tense.
You drill the conjugations, and then maybe at the end of class, you do a little role play.
TBL violently flips that sequence upside down. You start with a non-linguistic task.
Walk me through exactly what a TBL lesson looks like from minute 0 to minute 50, because this is exactly the kind of concrete application the exam board wants to see.
Okay. Imagine a class of 15-year-olds. The teacher walks in and does not mention grammar at all. Instead, the teacher presents a problem.
Your group has a budget of 1,000 euros. You have 50 minutes to research and plan a comprehensive 3-day weekend itinerary for a group of tourists visiting our city.
You must agree on the hotel, the meals, and the activities, and present your final schedule to the class.
That is the task. It is authentic, it is meaningful, and it requires negotiation.
So the students get into groups and immediately start arguing about whether they should spend the budget on a fancy dinner or a museum tour.
Exactly. And as they are desperately trying to complete this task, a linguistic need organically arises.
They realize they need the future tense to say, on Saturday, we will visit the museum.
They need the vocabulary for transportation. They need interactional phrases like, I disagree, that hotel is too expensive.
The language emerges naturally as a necessary tool to solve the problem, rather than an abstract rule to be memorized.
Swain's noticing the gap happens organically.
And what is the teacher doing while the students are arguing about hotels?
The teacher is circulating. They are listening.
When a group hits a linguistic wall, when they lack the vocabulary to express their idea, the teacher provides that specific language exactly at the moment of highest cognitive demand.
It is incredibly effective. It's learning by doing.
And the physical structure that makes TBL possible brings us to the third methodology, cooperative learning.
Traditional classrooms are often structured with rows of desks facing the teacher. The teacher asks a question, one student raises their hand and answers.
Let's look at the math on that. If I have a 50-minute class with 30 students, and I am running the show from the front of the room, controlling every interaction,
Each individual student might get a total of 45 seconds of actual speaking time in the entire lesson.
that is a catastrophic failure of language acquisition. They aren't getting anywhere near the output Merrill Swain says they need.
Which is why cooperative learning is essential. By physically reorganizing the room, putting students into pairs or small groups of 4 to execute these tasks.
You completely alter the dynamic. Instead of one person speaking at a time, you suddenly have 30 students speaking simultaneously for 20 minutes straight.
You exponentially increase the density of practice time.
But there is a deep psychological benefit to cooperative learning as well, tying back to Krashen.
Yes, the affective filter. Gratian argued that anxiety, fear of failure, and self-consciousness act as a mental block, a filter that prevents language acquisition.
Standing up and trying to speak a foreign language in front of 30 judgmental teenagers and an evaluating adult is terrifying. The affective filter shoots up.
By moving the practice into a small, cooperative peer group, you radically lower the stakes.
You build a supportive microenvironment where taking risks feels safe. This is also how we address the critical mandate of inclusivity.
How so?
Cooperative structures allow students of varying linguistic levels to support each other. A stronger student can act as a model and a guide for a struggling student.
It ensures that learners with specific educational needs or massive language anxiety still have a protected space to participate and produce output.
Okay, I love the theory of all of this, but I want to push back on behalf of every exhausted teacher listening right now who is thinking about the practical reality of classroom management.
Sure.
If I have 30 energetic teenagers engaged in cooperative task-based learning, the room is not going to be quiet. It is going to be incredibly loud. It feels chaotic.
And realistically, how do I know they aren't just sitting in their groups chatting in their native language about a video they saw on TikTok?
It is the eternal, terrifying question of the communicative classroom.
And embracing these methodologies requires a profound ego death for the teacher. You have to relinquish absolute control.
You are no longer the sage on the stage, the single focal point of knowledge dictating every sound in the room. You must transform into the guide on the side.
Yes, the room will be loud. But as an educator, you learn to distinguish between the chaotic noise of misbehavior and the productive, buzzing noise of active cognitive engagement.
And how do you combat the native language reliance? Because that's the easiest escape route for a student.
That entirely comes down to the rigor of your task design. If the task is boring or if it lacks a clear, accountable outcome, they will revert to their native language.
But if the task involves a genuine information gap, where they absolutely cannot complete the assignment without extracting information from their partner,
They are forced into the target language. Your job as the guide is to constantly circulate, monitor the groups, enforce the target language rule with proximity, and provide the linguistic scaffolding they need when they get stuck.
it is physically and mentally much harder work than standing at a chalkboard lecturing. But the acquisition results are undeniably superior.
That reality check perfectly sets up Section 6, Classroom Application.
This is the grand finale of the essay's body. You have to prove to the examiners that you don't just know the buzzwords, you know exactly what activities to deploy on a rainy Tuesday morning.
And more importantly, you know how to assess them. Let's start with the activities. The outline gives us a menu of highly effective communicative tasks.
We've talked about TBL generally, but what are some specific formats?
Role plays and simulations are the bread and butter. This is where you physically recreate the outside world inside the classroom.
You bought a defective laptop, and you need to return it to a hostile store manager. Go.
It forces students to adopt a persona, which often lowers their anxiety, and it requires them to practice specific pragmatic functions like complaining, apologizing, or insisting.
The outline also lists debates and discussions.
This pushes students into higher-order cognitive skills, collaborative argumentation, presenting a controversial topic, should mobile phones be banned in schools?
Requires them to formulate complex opinions, use discourse markers to sequence their logic, and use interactional strategies to politely disagree and negotiate with their opponents.
Next is storytelling. This isn't just for primary school.
Not at all. Having secondary students collaboratively build a narrative or recount a detailed personal experience is incredible for building long-form fluency.
It forces them to manage past tenses, chronological sequencing, and audience engagement.
Now, earlier you mentioned the phrase information gap activities as the ultimate weapon against students using their native language. Dive into the mechanics of that. Why does it cause so much productive friction?
An information gap activity is the purest possible simulation of a real-world communicative need. In real life, we talk because we want to know something we don't currently know.
In a traditional classroom, a teacher might hold up a picture of an apple and ask, "What is this?" The student says, "It's an apple."
The teacher already knew it was an apple. There was no genuine communication happening. It was a display of knowledge.
It's fake interaction.
Exactly. An information gap creates a genuine deficit of knowledge. Imagine student A has a map with a route drawn on it, but half the street names are missing.
Student B has the identical map with all the street names, but no route. They sit facing each other, and they are forbidden from looking at each other's papers.
Oh, the psychological tension of that is brilliant.
They must talk to each other to solve the puzzle. Student A has to say, "Go down the street with the bank." Wait, what is the name of that street?
Student B has to scan their map, locate the bank, and reply, "That's Elm Street. Do I turn left or right?"
The gap can only be bridged through intensive, negotiated oral interaction.
And finally, the outline mentions integrating digital technologies.
This is crucial for a modern exam. You have to show you live in the 21st century.
Video conferencing with a partner school in another country creates the ultimate authentic interaction.
Having students record podcast projects or create multimedia presentations utilizes technology to force output and build digital literacy alongside linguistic competence.
Okay, we have our students engaged, the room is buzzing, they are negotiating information gaps.
And now we hit the most terrifying and contradictory part of teaching oral communication: assessment.
How do you assign a mathematical grade to a messy, spontaneous jazz improvisation?
It is the hardest thing a language teacher has to do.
Right.
The outline specifies 5 criteria that must be evaluated when observing spoken language.
First, pronunciation and intelligibility. We aren't demanding native perfection, but can they be understood without the listener screening?
Second, fluency. Is the speech relatively smooth, or is it agonizingly halting with massive disruptive hesitations?
Third, accuracy. Yes,
Right.
even in a communicative classroom, grammar still matters. Are they deploying the correct structural forms?
Fourth, vocabulary range.
Hmm.
Are they using precise, varied words, or are they constantly relying on pointing and saying, "That thing over there"?
And fifth, arguably the most vital for real-world survival, interactional strategies. When they inevitably stumble, do they maintain the flow?
Do they ask for clarification, or do they just shut down?
I have to pause here because I feel a massive logical contradiction.
What's that?
For the last 50 minutes, we have been building this beautiful narrative. Language is a messy social tool. We want students to take risks. We want them to focus on meaning.
And now, at the end of the semester, we're going to pull out a cold, rigid rubric, slap it on a clipboard, and dock their grade every time they use the wrong verb tense.
Doesn't assessing them this way completely destroy the safe, low-anxiety environment we just built? Doesn't it just recreate the exact fear that froze our student in Paris?
There is a fascinating inherent tension there. And addressing it directly is exactly the nuance that will elevate an exam essay from good to exceptional.
You are entirely correct. If you only assess students summatively, meaning a high-stakes, final judgment grade at the end of the unit that goes on their permanent record,
Then yes, a rigid rubric becomes a weapon that terrifies them and instantly raises the effective filter. They will stop taking risks and revert to safe, simple, memorized phrases.
so how do we evaluate them without destroying them?
This is why your essay must heavily emphasize the critical importance of formative assessment.
Formative assessment is the continuous, low-stakes, diagnostic feedback you provide during the learning process.
It's assessment for learning, not just of learning.
Give me an example of what that looks like in the classroom.
You are walking around monitoring a role play. You hear three different groups repeatedly struggle with the past tense of a specific verb.
You don't interrupt them and correct them on the spot, which would ruin the flow.
You make a quiet note on your clipboard. The next day, you start the class with a quick 5-minute focused mini lesson on that specific verb based on your observation.
You are using assessment to guide your teaching, not to punish the student.
And when you do have to give a summative grade, how do you handle the rubric?
You use a communicative rubric. A traditional rubric might award 50% of the grade for perfect grammatical accuracy.
A communicative rubric heavily weights task completion and interactional strategies.
If a student is doing a role play about returning a broken phone, and they use terrible broken grammar, but they successfully deploy circumlocution, negotiate meaning, and ultimately convince the teacher to give them a refund,
They should receive a high score for communicative competence.
you are rewarding the successful transfer of meaning. You are rewarding their ability to use the life raft even if the boat isn't pretty.
Exactly. You assess what you value. If you value communication, your rubric must mathematically reflect that.
Wow. Okay, let's take a deep breath. We have covered an immense amount of theoretical and practical ground.
If you are listening to this, meticulously preparing for your exam, let's do a quick structural review. Because if you organize your essay following this narrative logic, it is going to be incredibly compelling.
You hook the examiner in the introduction with Del Hymes and the radical shift from sterile structural grammar to the living, breathing concept of communicative competence, anchored by the CEFR.
You then transition into the theoretical framework using Michael Halliday's social semiotic system to explain why spoken language is spontaneous, co-constructed, and context-heavy.
In the Key Models section, you demonstrate deep psychological insight by contrasting Krashen's passive comprehensible input with the vital friction of Swain's output hypothesis, and you explain the neurological necessity of top-down listening.
You pivot to oral interaction, detailing the life raft strategies. Then the practical application. You outline the teaching implications through the lens of CLT and the specific mechanics of a task-based learning lesson.
Finally, you bring it home with classroom application, illustrating the psychological power of information gaps and the necessity of formative assessment rubrics.
It is an airtight structure. It shows you understand the history, the cognitive science, and the minute-by-minute reality of teaching.
But a truly great exam essay doesn't just end by summarizing the introduction. A top-tier candidate ends with a powerful, "So what?"
Why does all this immense effort to foster oral communication actually matter in the grand scheme of human development?
The outline points us toward the answer. We aren't just teaching a subject. Fostering oral communication is fundamentally about building learner autonomy.
It's about instilling the confidence to navigate the unknown. It is about giving young people the literal, physical voice they need to participate actively and democratically in an increasingly multilingual, multicultural society.
We are teaching them the mechanics of empathy. We are teaching them how to negotiate meaning and build understanding across vast cultural boundaries.
That is the ultimate goal of the modern language classroom.
And as we close this deep dive, I want to leave you, our listener, with a final provocative thought, something to mull over.
It isn't explicitly written in your syllabus, but if you weave this synthesis into your conclusion, it shows the examiner that you are a forward-thinking educator looking at the horizon.
For the last hour, we have talked entirely about the messy, beautiful struggle of human-to-human interaction. But right now, artificial intelligence and instantaneous digital translation tools on our phones are advancing at a terrifying speed.
In 10 years, maybe 5, a student might be able to put a subtle earpiece in and have perfect real-time translation of any language in the world whispered into their ear without ever studying a single grammar chart or vocabulary word.
It is a technological reality that is approaching very quickly, and it threatens the foundational premise of language education.
So the question becomes, if technology completely solves the basic survival aspect of communication, if an AI can order your coffee in Paris or ask for directions flawlessly,
Will the spontaneous, messy struggle of oral communication that we teach still be necessary? Or will teaching a foreign language shift away from mere utilitarian survival and become purely a tool for deep, authentic human connection?
will it become a deliberate philosophical choice to step away from the machine and engage with another culture on their own terms, in their own chaotic jazz?
Mentioning that changing technological landscape in your conclusion demonstrates that you aren't just memorizing theories from the 1970s, you are actively preparing for the future of education.
That is a profound thought to leave an exam board with.
To our listener, preparing for the opposition exams, you have the historical context, you have the cognitive models, you have the practical classroom applications. You are ready.
Trust the narrative logic, remember the analogies, and go show them what true communicative competence looks like. We are rooting for you.
Best of luck. The communicative landscape might be chaotic, but your understanding of it is now crystal clear. See you next time.